At TBX 2022, I gave this talk about synthetic biology. Let me start with a story. It was a couple of months ago, I get a text from my mother. "Peter, can I call you?" So I know something is wrong. My father was cycling uphill and he had a little headwind, and then as a sudden he fainted and fell on the ground. Blood everywhere. But he's very stubborn. I can say that's because I'm his son. And he decided, I can just walk home or cycle home. So he entered the house and my mother saw him. "What has happened? We should go to see the general practitioner." And he's, it's okay, don't worry. But they decided to go to the GP's office. And they went there and the general practitioner said, "I'm going to call an ambulance." So they went to the hospital, did all kinds of tests on my father, and the cardiologist said, "You have 3 coronary arteries surrounding your heart. 2 of the 3 are completely clogged, and 1 is performing at 25%. So my father underwent surgery, a bypass operation. And that really made me think, because my grandfather, the father of my father, he passed away due to a heart attack. And that made me think about my own health. What are my own risks and predispositions? And even further, it made me realize, what about Hidde? Because I'm now the father of Hidde. He's 1 year old, on the left, by the way. And it made me think, what is the risks and the health and the benefits that Hidde has? Because, as a kind of introduction, you get half of your DNA from your father and half of your DNA from your mother, and they get it from their fathers and mothers. So DNA is almost in every cell of our body, in your body and my body, but not only humans, also in animals and plants and bacteria. And we are now learning more and more about the power of genetics. And also, a couple of years ago, I did a genetic test myself. Raise your hand if you also did a commercial genetic test yourself. That's about, let's say, 5% of the room. And in my test, I found out some obvious results. For example, that I probably have curly hair and the color of my eyes. And also, when I eat asparagus, then when I go to the toilet, I can smell it. And there were also some things, for example, I really tried to be a Men's Health cover model, lifting weights in the gym. But based on my genetics, I'm more of an endurance athlete. And also, there were some interesting things concerning my character. At least that's what the DNA test said. Because based on my genetics, I probably get angry very fast and I lack empathy. And my girlfriend says that at least one of those 2 is correct. And I still don't know which one. Well, so I talk about biotech, genetics, and synthetic biology. And as Monique also introduced me, I'm a biohacker. So I'm interested in what is the impact of biotechnology and synthetic biology on our lives and on our businesses. And I also studied at the Biohack Academy cohorts 2019 at Waag Amsterdam, where I learned the basic fundamentals of working in a lab and also doing some projects like gene extraction, gene analysis, and also genetic modification. And first off, I want to talk about why is this relevant right now. And I'll give you 5 examples. And the first one is in healthcare. This was a couple of months ago where they successfully performed the first pig-to-human heart transplant. That's also called xenotransplantation. But before they implanted the pig's heart into the human body, they genetically modified the pig's heart because otherwise the human body would reject that heart. So that's the first example in healthcare. Another example, one of the most enormous challenges we face as humans today is, of course, the climate crisis. And plants are already magnificent, of course, in sucking CO2 out of the air, but maybe we can help with that. That at least what some scientists are researching. Can we also improve that capability of plants with this CO2 and thereby help us and also the planet? And if we talk about the climate, we also think about pollution. So this is also an interesting development where there's an enzyme that can devour plastic trash in hours. And please take note of the first part of this article, this AI-designed enzyme. I will get back to that later. So here again, you see the combination of biotech and infotech. And another example, the third example, is about infrastructure. where they now also, scientists are working on living concrete. So, and that's also really cool, because if the brick is not completely dehydrated, it can also continue to multiply till eight times, I think. So instead of building in a linear way, we can now also build in an exponential way. So how awesome is that? And another application is in fashion. This is an example of the Vereinsbrand Hermès. You're probably familiar with that. And they also cooperate with a mycelium startup called MycoWorks. And maybe in the future we have these kinds of application where you have self-healing leather, for example, or maybe that also self-recycling after a couple of years or months. And the last example, when we're concerning this age of biotech, that makes me think about food. And this is an example of a combination with another technology called 3D printing, where they also show that they can 3D print these kinds of beef, also with the same kind of blood vessels and fat cells and all the little fibers. And they state that it will taste identical as regular meat, or maybe in the future we'll say old-fashioned meat, if we talk about cultured meat at least. And in this domain of food, I'm curious, who here hates to have a hangover? Raise your hand. Yeah, that's about 80% of you. It also gets worse, right, when you age? Yeah, that's correct. That's at least what I feel concerning my head. But there's now also a company in the States called Biotics. They're working on a probiotic to help you with your hangover. So you can have the booze, but without the headaches. So these are a couple of examples concerning synthetic biology. I talked about healthcare, about the climate, about infrastructure, about fashion, and about food. And I'm curious, just a short poll, which one of these do you find is the most fascinating or interesting? Raise your hand if you think it's healthcare. That's about 50%, I would say. Who says, well, for me it's the climate? That's a little bit more. Who says, well, for me, the infrastructure? That's less. And who's very interested in fashion in this domain? A couple of you. And food with the hangover. Yeah, the hangover did the trick, I think. Yeah. So I'm curious, just a small type of interaction. Can I ask you, what did you answer, sir?
Climate.
Climate, yeah. And why? What are the motivations of your...
Climate is very now and it's important.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. Can I also ask you, what did you answer?
Healthcare.
Healthcare, yeah. And your motivation for that?
Because healthcare is really under pressure. There's not enough people to take care of the elderly, of the sick people. So if we can help those professionals with additional technology, that will be beneficial.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. And for you, sir, because you answered the first question, please visit me after. Please visit me after the talk. Then you'll get a free copy of my book, Supermans. Yeah. A round of applause for the first volunteer. And also for the rest of you, if you did not win the book, Christmas is coming up, so hint, hint. All right. So as a futurist, I'm also interested in what are the second-order effects of these kinds of developments. For example, are there certain regions or countries that have another culture or another way they look at these kinds of projects and experiments? And I like the take of John L. Oliver on the domain of gene editing, specifically related to the country of China. All right, I get back to the edit later. So I talked about why it's relevant right now for you and your businesses. Now you're probably thinking here, why now? Why should I pay attention now? Well, I'll give you 3 reasons. The first one is, as an IT audience, you're probably familiar with Moore's Law. And what's really fascinating is that the cost of genome sequencing first caught up with the Moore's Law, and then, boom, went down like way beyond the cost of the Moore's Law was progressing. That's also called the Carlson's curve. So that's the first example. And the second example is that also public organizations and governments are also paying attention. This is a recent initiative by the US government where President Biden launched the National Biotechnology and Biomanufacturing Initiative. And they're all aimed at the different kind of applications I mentioned before: climate, food, healthcare, etc. And the third example why it's relevant right now is when you look at the funding of synthetic biology companies. That's also growing exponentially in the last couple of years. So these are all signs that you have to pay attention to this domain of synthetic biology. But maybe you're still sitting in the audience and thinking, why me? Why is it relevant for me? Well, that's because these two domains are merging together. So when we look at synthetic biology, this is a definition by the Wageningen University, then we see it has to do with all kinds of domains. By the way, the difference, if you're curious, what's the difference between biotech and synthetic biology? Biotechnology is more looking at how can we improve existing life forms, and synthetic biology is can we create new life forms that can also perform new functions. But when you look at this definition or this schematic by the Wageningen University, you of course see microbiology and agriculture and chemistry, but you also see like bioinformatics and also computer science and physics. So this is an example where these two domains are coming together. And I give you a couple of other examples. For when I did the Biohack Academy at the Waag, I ordered also synthetic DNA, where I performed some cuts and edits. But before I got the synthetic DNA to do the project in a lab, I worked with this program called Benchling to do simulations and analysis of the certain cut points for the enzymes to work on. So before I did my experiment in vitro, I did it in silico. Dus again, you see the combination of both worlds. And probably also heard the news about DeepMind, who uncovered the structure of 200 million proteins. Because proteins, they are essential in our lives. That's also based on the DNA. You have a transcript to RNA, it built into amino acids that are proteins. But the way that they function is dependent not only on how they are structured, but also how they are folded. And until now, it was a really mystery about how does these processes work and how do they fold. And now DeepMind also helped with that. So again, you see the combination of these two domains. And I like to quote late Steve Jobs at a conference like this, because he said, I think that the biggest innovations of the 21st century will be at the intersection of biology and technology. A new era is beginning. So there we see the combination of biotech and infotech. So it will also probably impact your lives and also your businesses. But maybe you are looking at this lecture and thinking, maybe you got a hunch or a gut feeling like, should we go ahead this fast? And there are some applications which does not really feel right for me. And that's a valid point. So for the last part of my presentation, I want to talk about ethics. Because you are also familiar with cybersecurity and what will happen if you have a data leakage. That's of course troublesome, but the problem could be even worse if you also have a data leakage of your DNA, for example, because you cannot change your own genetics. Well, you can, but that's not all another story. So it highlights or magnifies the troubles we already see in IT if we also apply it to biotech. And also think of cybersecurity. Can we see similarities between regular IT hacking and biohacking, for example? And one really fascinating example is in a book by Ronald Kessler, 2009, at the President's Service. And he was a naval steward working for President Obama at that time. And in this book, Ronald Kessler states that when President Obama would visit a hotel, just to stay there for the night, the naval stewards would collect all the bed sheets, all the drinking glasses, so that malefactors could not get a hold of one of the genetic material of the president. Think about that. So maybe they can analyze the genetics and explain or bring some of the risks of the president into the open, the genetic risk. But there was also talk of personalized bioweapons based on the genetics of the president. So that's a second type of ethical question or challenge we face when we talk about synthetic biology. And the third one is a technology called gene drive. And this is Kevin Ashfield at MIT, and he's working at gene drive technology. And what you do is, instead of making genetic changes in an animal or in a human, that's called somatic genetic modification, so it stays within the body. But with gene drive technology, you can also change it in the sex cells. That's why that a change in a human or in an animal, in the case of gene drive, you will also continue, that character will also continue to evolve in your offspring, so in the next generation. So in that way, they are looking at this technology, for example, to eradicate malaria, so that the offspring will only be males, and males cannot spread the malaria disease to humans. But again, that makes me think, well, is it really a good idea for us as humans to tinker with evolution? Well, the comedy Family Guy also made a prediction about that. So to close off, a recap of what I told you today. I first started my story with the applications about climate, healthcare, fashion, food, infrastructure. Then I talked why it's relevant right now for you to pay attention to synthetic biology, and also why it's relevant for you, because we see the merger of synthetic biology also with information technology. And last part, we also see the same kind of moral and ethical questions. We can see some similarities with IT, but also come up with new ethical and moral dilemmas if you talk about changing evolution for the better, and maybe also as a way to help us with the climate crisis. But I started my story, if you remember, about my father. And my father, luckily, he's doing well. He's in the middle. And that really made me think about the similarities between what happened to my father and also to me, and also the story about synthetic biology. Because my father is now aware of the risks and predispositions he has that are probably in his genes. And I think the same applies to synthetic biology and your interest. So think about yourself this afternoon or tonight of what I just heard. What are the benefits of synthetic biology to my life and my business, but also what are the challenges? And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention.